Hi guys, welcome to the live stream, and I think we're just supposed to start like 6 7 minutes later. I'm just gonna be waiting for I think people who would be just joining in by 7:30 or so, and we'll start early and people will skip a bit. So I think a lot of people, like 5 6 people, I can already see there on the chat. Um, just a second. So the people who have already joined, can you uh, discuss about what kind of things do you already have experience with? Have you made mobile apps before? Have you made web apps before? Any one of you who has tried out Flutter already? Or anybody who has tried out Dart already, and like whether did you like Dart? If you have tried out already, something like that. Like you can just answer on the chat. How many of you guys have like worked with native Android development before? Like you made apps using Kotlin or Java before? Anyone who has joined in the live stream already? Anyone who has like worked on native apps? Yeah, just say hi out there on the chat. And also like anybody who has worked with native iOS apps, like using Objective-C or Swift. Anybody who has done, just mention that as well. I'd just like to get an idea of the kind of people who are watching the live stream. Okay, let me just discuss what I have, at least for now, figured out about Flutter now. Actually, during live stream, I'm going to just build my first Flutter app. Actually, I have no experience building apps with Flutter or with like the Dart language per se. I had tried Dart a long time back when Dart was considered to be like a replacement for JavaScript, and Google was pushing that a lot, that you can use Dart to do a lot of stuff. Back then, I had tried out Dart a bit. I think if I'm not wrong, Dart has changed a lot since those days. It's not the same thing anymore. It's a very different language now, and with Flutter, like they are pushing Dart a lot. I think Dart did not really work on the JavaScript front. People who are JavaScript developers, they have moved on to language like TypeScript instead of going to a language like Dart. But like Flutter, so I think there are a bunch of places where you can read about Flutter. One of the things that tells you that Flutter is not really very popular mainstream and only developers are looking for Flutter is that if you like go to say like Google and search about Flutter, so you're gonna see that there's like a bunch of videos out there which talks about like how to learn Flutter, and then Flutter's Medium blog comes up, and in fact the Flutter.io website, which is like the homepage for Flutter, does come up, but only the getting started page for that. In fact, the home page is not one of the Google search results. So you can say that like normal people who are not developing stuff, they are not really searching for Flutter right now. It's like the developers are searching for Flutter and they go to the getting started page usually. And like there's a bunch of stuff from like GitHub and Google developers. So it's very developer oriented thing right now. It's not something like traveling in a metro and you discuss with are you using Flutter, not that kind of a thing, not as popular as the operating systems like Android or iOS itself. um, it's of course very nascent. So I think what the website says is that you can build iOS and Android apps using this technology, and they are touting three things: fast development, expressive and flexible UI, and native performance. And now this is pretty important, this native performance part, because I think this is something that they are trying to say that we are better than React Native or Native Script, because in those frameworks, there's a bit of JavaScript code that's running that slows down the entire framework. I worked with NativeScript and React Native before, and while they're really good, the performance does not really match up to completely native apps made in Kotlin or Java kind of, right? So, and like fast development and stuff, there's hot reload. Hot reload, I think React Native also supports hot reload. What I'm going to do is just check out how to get started with that. What are the things that we need to install to get started with this? And then we're going to come back to some of the websites, some of the blogs, which are really helpful to get an idea of how Flutter works. I think one of the definite blogs that someone must read is a Hacker Noon one called "What's Revolutionary About Flutter," and this gives you a complete overview about how native development works, how web views work, like when you're using a hybrid app like Ionic or something, how that works, how React Native kind of things work. So there's an example of how things like React Native or native script kind of technologies work. And finally, there is an example of how Flutter is working. So Flutter does the entire rendering itself. So it's a very nice example written by somebody from the Flutter team. So we'll come back to this blog and we'll discuss this. But first, let's just, I mean, when I'm trying to learn something new, what I do is I try to read about like, uh, is it gaining traction, like people are interested in that. And about Flutter, I figured out that people are interested in that, people are reading about Flutter and all. So next step, I just straight dive into the framework itself and see how we can install it, how it gets set up with that. So I'm right now on a MacBook, so I'm just seeing how to install it on the MacBook. uh, One of the things that I just read on this getting started article, I figured that what Flutter has done is that they don't ask you to install Dart first. They ask you to just directly install Flutter. So the Dart compiler and the Dart virtual machine, all of that stuff is part of Flutter SDK itself, which something I think is a good step, because I think Google has learned this from how Android development works. You ask people to first install the JVM and install it separately first, and then you ask people to go to the Android Studio installation. And a lot of times people miss that out. Sometimes somebody has got Java version 9 or 10 or 11 installed on their computer, and then they install the Android Studio and it does not work. So there are some issues with that. This is pretty good. That they don't ask you to install Dart first. They ask you to install Flutter directly, and Flutter comes with its own Dart instance inbuilt. So yeah, go and download this zip file, which I actually have already done, and I have done this unzip part. So what I've done is I have unzipped Flutter into /opt/flutter. So yeah, so if let's just take a look at so I have installed it here, cd opt/flutter, and once you install that, it like there's a bunch of stuff here. There is like packages, examples, stuff like that. So and there's the bin file inside which there is the Dart SDK. So Dart is in part of the Flutter installation already. When I have just really not installed it, I've just unzipped it. That's all that you need to do if you're using Linux or if you're using Mac OS X. then all you need to do is just unzip stuff, and it starts working. So Oh, okay. There's an interesting question here out there in the live stream is that should we learn Flutter instead of Android? I think the answer to that question is, I mean, instead of Android, I would say no. You can't really make a whole bunch of apps using non-native technologies. Like if you're using background services or you're using camera and you're modifying how the camera works, like putting filters and stuff, there's a whole lot of things that you can't achieve with any of these platform tools, whether it's React Native or whether it's Flutter or Native Script. Any of these things, it's not possible. If you're just making an UI to consume a backend REST API, then these tools are really useful. I really don't know like kind of capabilities Flutter has. I'm just exploring it right now, but from what I read, Flutter's capabilities are very similar to the capabilities that React Native has. In fact, I've been reading about that you can't embed a Google Map component, or you can't embed a web view into your Flutter app directly right now, as it seems, because Flutter is doing its own rendering, so it cannot render Android views inside it. So there are downsides, and you can't really like build everything that you can build using native development technologies using Flutter. So it's not, 1:1 parity right now. But yeah, coming back to that, so I've unzipped my Flutter installation, and then so you have this tool which is to run Flutter Doctor. So I'm gonna run this Flutter Doctor. So I mean, just before starting the video, I did run this once, and it basically checks if all the things that are required for Flutter to operate correctly are they there or not, and it shows that if Flutter is installed and the Android toolchain is installed, Android SDK is installed. It does show me that a bunch of things are not installed on my computer. I think this if Flutter is getting wrong because I have libi device and USB MuxD and iDevice installed. I have all of these tools installed. In fact, I need them when I'm developing React Native and Native Script as well. So I do have these things installed, but I think because I'm using Xcode 9 and not 10, I think the latest version is 10, so it's just asking me to update that. So I'm going to ignore that error message. Android Studio is installed, but Flutter has not been able to find out the Flutter plugin and the Dart plugin. I think it's because I have got two versions of Android Studio installed right now. I have got Studio. I've got the 3.3 preview version and I have the 3.2 version. So I don't have the Flutter plugin and the Dart plugin inside my 3.3 version of the Studio. I have them in my 3.2. So my 3.2 row shows up correctly. The preview version does not show up correctly. That's fine. I'm not going to use the preview version right now. I have like IntelliJ, VS Code, so IDs are all there. So Flutter Doctor gives me, like you can say, green light. Now, I think what else we need to do is, if we go by the document here, is next step, like for iOS, we have to like get Xcode installed and the iOS simulator installed, both of which, if you have done iOS development already, these things would already be installed. I have done a bit of iOS development already. I have been a native developer. So I have these things up here. In fact, I have my iPhone 8 simulator running here, and I have my Android simulator running out here. So I got both of these things running. I have got the simulator, so I've got iOS, Android stuff running. So I think this section, iOS setup and Android setup, is like a tick mark for me already. But if you haven't done Android development before and if you haven't done iOS development before, then you need to go to these. Of course, if you're not running a MacBook, if you're not running an Apple device, then you can't do the iOS stuff because installing iOS apps onto iPhones or onto a simulator needs a macOS device. Although, like, you might be able to get Mac running on a non-Apple laptop using Hackintosh or something like that. But you need Mac. You can't do this without macOS. Android stuff would work like on, it will work on Linux, it will work on Android, Windows and it will work on Mac. It will work everywhere, so no problems with that. So I think next step is to configure the editor, um, and I think we can use either one of the IntelliJ based IDEs, which is we can use IntelliJ IDEA or we can use Android Studio, or we can use one of the most popular IDEs these days, which is Visual Studio Code. And if you look at YouTube videos of programming and coding, people teaching how to do that, most of it is in Visual Studio Code. It's a very popular IDE. It does not have the bells and whistles. It does not have all the functionality that the IntelliJ IDEs or Android Studio has. So you need to install the Flutter and the Dart plugins if you're using Android Studio or IntelliJ. If you're using Visual Studio Code, then also there is the Flutter and the Dart plugins. You have to install them. So I think I have both. I have my Android Studio. So I'll just go to plugins and I will show you. So there is a you have to go to browse repositories, and inside browse repositories, if you search for Flutter, you'll get the Flutter plugin, and you will have the Dart plugin. So we need to have this Dart and the Flutter plugins, both of these installed. So I've done that because it take a bit of time for me to just do that during the video. So I've already installed the plugins. So I have the plugins installed. And if you're using Visual Studio Code, then I mean, you might want to use VS Code. It's going to be a little more lightweight than Android Studio or IntelliJ. IntelliJ Ultimate version comes with a license as well. So let me just close this folder. I'll just open a fresh instance. You can go to you go to the extensions, and there is Flutter. There is a Flutter extension, and there's a Dart extension. So we need both of these. Okay. If your computer is has like 8 GB or more of RAM, it is i5 or i7 or something like that, I definitely recommend using Android Studio or using IntelliJ, because if you have the performance to be able to run these IDs, these have much more features. You can start and stop your simulator and do your breakpoint debugging and all of that stuff. That's going to be a bit easier on these IDs. So let's get started with creating a test drive, right? You create your first app. So of course, to create your first app, we'll have to do something like start a new Flutter project. And okay, so there's like you can create a Flutter application, you can create a Flutter plugin, a Flutter package, or a Flutter module. So if you're adding Flutter functionality into an existing Android app, you use a Flutter module. If you are creating a plugin that other developers would be using, you create a plugin, a library kind of a thing. And if you're creating a Dart package, which has only the Dart components, it does not have Android or iOS code inside that, then you can create a Flutter package. We are going to create a Flutter application because we want like end-to-end. We want like something to build and run and try it out. So next, and let's give it a name. So say first Flutter app, maybe that's my name. In the path to the Flutter SDK, wherever you have unzipped your Flutter SDK, you just have to give this path there, some description. Next, and you give your company domain, which is used to create the package name, which is the reverse of your company domain, followed by the name of the app. If you remove these tick marks here, I have built one sample project before. I figured that if you put a tick mark here, then the Android parts of your project get generated in Kotlin, otherwise they get generated in Java. Similarly, if you put a tick mark here, it creates the iOS part of your project in Swift. Otherwise, it creates it in Objective-C. I think Swift and Kotlin are modern languages. That's what most people are using when developing iOS and Android stuff. So I think it's good to have these ticks here. We need Kotlin support. We need Swift support. Let's just finish. We will get our app running, I think. Okay, so Ayush Das has been asking, before we, is thorough knowledge of data structures important for app building? I think it's a very good question. So is thorough knowledge of data structures required for building apps? Interesting question. What do you guys think? What do the other guys think? So I'll just answer that. I think if you want to just get to build a Hello World app, or you want to create a list or stuff like that, just want to know how apps are built, you don't need to know data structures and algorithms. But when you have to create a real world application, you actually are thinking of a problem in your mind. You're thinking like something like, I want to build an app like Uber. People are going to search for cabs, and I'm going to see the shortest path between the cab and me. All of that stuff starts coming in. You need data structures and algorithms. So whenever you're solving real world problems, you have to translate the problem into a mathematical solution. You have to come up with some data structures where you want to store your data. You have to have a good knowledge of algorithms. You should be able to, do things like, array operations, traversing the linked lists, and a lot of times your data is going to be in a shape of a tree or in shape of a graph. So traversing trees, traversing graphs, being able to find out data inside a graph, inside a tree, all of that stuff. These things would become very much important. So yeah, I mean, just to build an app for the sake of building an app, you won't need data structures and algorithms. But if you like want to actually build an app that solves some problems, you want to deliver that to the users, you would need data structures and algorithms most of the times. So not a good idea to skip data structures and algorithms when you start building apps or websites for that matter. Okay, coming back to the project that we were building, we have got the project set up here. I think let's just see what kind of folders. Now, when I'm starting off with a new technology, what I do usually is, as soon as the project is built, I just check out what files got generated. Okay, so there's a folder called Android, there's a folder called iOS, there's a folder called lib, there's a folder called test, and bunch of other metadata here. So Android contains actually the folder structure of just exactly how we develop an Android app. It has the app module, which has src main. You'll have Kotlin folder, and we have got a main activity.kt file. Anybody who has done Android development in Kotlin, very familiar, I think. Main activity extends Flutter activity. There is on create, and then there is some generate plugin restraint. This is something that usually you don't do when you're doing an Android app. I think this has something to do with how Flutter is used, right? It probably loads the Flutter app inside the activity. Anything inside Android cannot start unless it's an activity. So of course, no doubt there's going to be an activity out there. But like, if you don't know Android, haven't touched Android before, it's fine. Ignore the Android folder. Don't need to deal with that. If you have done iOS, then I think the iOS folder would be familiar too. So there is a Flutter package, a runner package. The runner package contains an app delegate. Okay, so app delegate is how your applications start in iOS. It's somewhat like an activity in Android. If you have done Android, so I think this we can open in Xcode if you want to. Open this like your iOS project, you can open it in Xcode. They give you an option because Android Studio does not support opening iOS stuff. Anyway, we're gonna take a look at the lib. So this is where I think all my Dart code is gonna be, and it contains only main.dart. It just contains main.dart, nothing else. So what we have here is okay, long file, and we have some tests. So there's a test which tests stuff. Okay, we'll see how unit testing works later on. I think testing is something we generally learn in a platform much later. You don't need to test when you're building small and simple projects. So main.dart, let's just see how to run this. I think to run this, we have to select any device. Okay, so I've got my Android emulator and I've got my iOS emulator running. iOS simulator, Android emulator, because the Android one is actually a virtual machine. iOS one is just, it tries to work like an iOS, but it's not an emulator, full-fledged emulator. That's why they're called emulator and simulator respectively. They're not the same thing. you might want to look up on Google what's the difference between an emulator and simulator. Anyway, so if I select my iPhone simulator and I just run my project, let's see what happens. So, okay, so launching in debug mode. I think so. My MacBook is making a lot of noise right now. All my fans are running on full speed. It's exactly how Android apps get built or iOS apps get built. It's a very performance intensive task is happening right now, and I don't think I like this. It's the top of the line MacBook, and it's heating up a bit, and all the fans are running. It's doing a lot of things. Okay, so if you want to check out the performance of your development machine, I think that's also very important when you're working with a particular framework. One thing is how it will perform when the app actually runs, and the other thing is how your own development machine responds to that. You can't really, build something if it takes 10 minutes, 20 minutes to build every time, which a lot of Android developers complain about. So I think it's built, and let's just check this. Yeah. So that's how the app looks like. Flutter demo home page app. We have very material looking app out here. So Flutter, because it's made by Google, they are pushing the material design guidelines, and the app looks exactly the same as it does on Android, as it does on iOS. We click on the plus button multiple times, increase the number. So simple app. Okay, we have a button. Clicking on that increases the number. Let's just try to run this. Let me just stop this. Let me try to run this on Android first. Let's see if it works on both the phones. Let me select the Android emulator and let's run. And I think this will take, I don't know, it'll take a lot of time, I think, because building the Hello World app on Android, like the default Android app in Android Studio, takes more time than the default iOS app does. So Android development is definitely like a more time-consuming process. Just keep in mind that this is not going to skip the amount of time that building an Android app takes, because like the Dart part of it is getting built, and then it's going to turn into an Android project, which will get built using Gradle and all of that stuff. So yeah, I think it's gonna take a little bit more time than it takes for an iOS project to build. So I think okay, so it's running, not a lot of time. If you're running Android or iOS for the first time ever, it's gonna take a lot more time. Don't worry, be patient. Installing all those dependencies take a lot of time. My laptop is kind of updated with the latest SDKs and the latest libraries, so it takes a little less time. So here we go. And exact same functionality as you can see, click on plus button, number increases. So on the iOS one, there's some differences also. So Flutter does, as I can see, it's respecting certain things in like the differences between operating systems. So like there is no like two different shades for the status bar and the action bar in iOS, because that's how iOS wants to make the action bar. The title is at the center of the screen. Android, it's at the left of the screen, and there's like the status bar is a little darker than the action bar. That's how Android material design guidelines are. When you're running this app in a debug mode, you get this little sticker at the top right which says debug. I need to check out how to remove that. There would definitely be a way to remove that stuff from the page here. Okay, so I think looks good. Now let's take a look at what this code is. So there's a single code which is doing all of that stuff, single Dart file. Now I think one of the first things that I encountered when I'm working with Flutter here is that like there is no concept of a storyboard or a concept of an XML file, so you can't like design the UI in a what you see is what you get kind of mode. Okay, so there is no graphical user interface designer. Now, for a lot of beginners, I think that can turn off people a bit, because you have to actually run your code, and when you're writing your code, you have to imagine what it's going to look like, and only when you actually run the code and it runs on the device, only then you actually get to see the UI. You can't, create a button on the screen and then you have with your mouse, you can like change the size, drag and drop. You can't do that. You have to define everything in code, which can be a little overwhelming for people who haven't written a lot of code before. So I think the people who are designing Flutter, they were targeting people who already have built mobile apps or at least web apps, and they understand the concept of building UI with code, not doing drag and drop kind of development. So I've actually checked. There is a Flutter UI designer kind of thing. There's a website. I just found out something. So I don't know. I'm not able to find that out. I mean, there was somebody had created this website where you could yeah, the Mutisia 2, I think this is the one. I'm not sure. I think this is the one. So somebody has made an online version of this. So let me just show that to you. This flutterstudio.app. If you go to this website, you can uh, you can drag and drop stuff and build Flutter UI. What you see is what you get more. There's like material design, and I think change like put scaffold. I don't know how that works. I don't know, tab bar view. Can we add that layout container? Okay, how is it gonna look on a Google Pixel 2? Refresh. Okay, okay. Maybe I think it works better on Chrome. I think it does not work on Firefox. Just get Google Chrome here. Okay. I think it works here. I think I have to create like container. Yeah, and like we can add stuff like we can create a app bar, and we can get tab bar view. We have bottom navigation at the bottom navigation bar, some text somewhere, or you can add like buttons, stuff like that. Yeah, so you can do these kind of things, I guess, here, and it generates Dart source code for you. So there is support for doing stuff like this, though not officially. So you can check out flutterstudio.app, which is where you can like do some drag and drop designing. But I don't know how well it's actually supporting all the different layouts that are available. Okay, but okay, anyway, let's just get back to the app that we were discussing. Okay, so let's read the comments here. It says that this is the theme of your application. Try running your application with Flutter Run. It says that if I change the color here and I click on this lightning button, it's going to reflect on my device immediately, which is hot reload. Let's just try that out. I'm going to change it to red and I'm going to do the hot reload. And oh, yeah, it's pretty fast. So I think this is one of the advantages that the developers of Flutter have been, touting a lot, because they know that people who are doing iOS and Android native development, they don't have this beautiful thing. They don't get hot reload. A hot reload on Android, you can do this lightning button thing, but it still takes some time to build all those Java Kotlin files, and then if you are like in an activity, then inside that there's a fragment. Inside that you have an adapter, and you make some changes there. it reloads the activity and the fragment of the adapter. So it's not really as smooth as how Flutter is working out here. Okay, so let's go ahead and see how the code is running. How is this counter kind of thing running? So apparently there are two things in Flutter. Like if I read about Flutter a bit, they say that okay, so write your first app. I think we have done that. How to build your first app. That's the part we have done. I think they have created an app where we can generate some pairs of words or something like that. Startup name generator, some app like that. So we'll come around and we'll build something like this. What we have here is that if you are like building an Android app user interface, so Flutter apps are built using the concept of widgets. Now everything in Flutter is actually widgets, which the Flutter developers themselves say that they have taken inspiration from React, which is very much like how React works. If you have done React development on a web, you know what kind of thing widgets are. So basically, you just create functions to create components on your page, and like there are widgets, and they're like uh, two kinds of widgets. I think there are stateful widgets and there are stateless widgets. So a stateless widget does not contain any data inside it that can change. Okay, so you create a button and this button has I don't know, it has a logo, and this logo or the image of the button does not change, then it's a stateless widget. Where you have, say, a button inside which there is an icon and that icon changes depending on which page you are on. I think that's a stateful widget because there's data associated with that widget. So you can create either stateful widget or stateless widgets. There's text widget, there's row, column, stack, a lot of these kind of widgets. You can build stuff using that. Um, there's a, I think, widget catalog where we can check out what all widgets exist in Flutter. So there are basic widgets. Basic widgets, they are for like creating layouts, like containers, rows, columns, image, text, icons, stuff like that. Then there are widgets which look like iOS, and there are widgets that look like Android. So the material ones are like these Android kind of widgets. There's a scaffold, there's an app bar, bottom navigation, tab bar view, okay, familiar stuff for people who have done Android development. Then there are the Cupertino iOS style widgets. These look very iOS-ish. Okay, there's the Cupertino alert dialog, which looks like the iOS alert dialog, and there's the Cupertino button. So I think there's a bit of a discriminatory approach from Flutter. They want to promote material, so the default widgets look like material. The Cupertino ones are just there for, if you really want iOS kind of style, okay, fine, there's something for you out there. But I think the focus is on material type of widgets out here. Um, okay, what else do we have? Wait, so there's like a cookbook, and this cookbook is pretty useful. Like useful things that we do with our app. So okay, somebody asked a good question. What about emulators in VS Code? So if you create a new Flutter project using VS Code, let me just build one. VS Code, and okay, Flutter new project. If I do like start a new project, uh, and I think so, I enter the name of the project, and the name of the project is Flutter app 2 maybe. I have to select the folder where I want to put this project. So I'm going to put it like inside try Flutter folder. Uh, okay, and okay, so yeah, this Flutter app 2 project. Uh, okay, So there are a lot of like tasks that are being done. It's creating the exact same folder structure that it created inside Android Studio. I think I'll just increase the size of everything inside VS Code for you to get a look. Um, it creates like the Android folder, the iOS folder, the lib, and the main, and all of that stuff. So create Flutter app. Your Flutter project is ready. It gives me a message. Connect a device and press F5 to start running. So I'll press F5. Okay, I don't debug, start debugging. So I click on start debugging, and okay, I think it's supposed to ask me which device it will run on, but I think by default it's running on my iPad. Okay, so I think this will not be able to run because my iPad is not in development mode. So I think I'm gonna have to disconnect my iPad. Okay, so this is not exactly as straightforward as doing it with Android Studio. I think I have to add a add configuration and Flutter. What else can we do? Okay, I had to create run configuration to run it on a particular device, something like that. So let me just see. I think we'll have to go to the terminal, and there would be a Flutter command, I guess, which can help us. Okay, so Flutter run, Flutter help run. Let's see what we get. Flutter help run. I think we can do. Okay, target platform. I think select something like Flutter run target platform Android. Okay. Okay, Android ARM64. Android X64. Okay, so that's how I can run on Android. I don't know. Okay, so I think we'll need to figure that out how to run it using the command line. Flutter run the this. Yeah, okay, so it's running. So you have to do like you list all the targets. You'll get like a list of targets here. Like this is my Android emulator. This is my iPad, and this is my iPhone 8 simulator. So I have to run Flutter run -d, like a flag D, and pass the ID of the emulator. In which case it builds it and runs it on the emulator. So I think if you want to like do something like that, if you want to automate this process, probably you can add like a debug configuration for Flutter, and probably provide arguments -d and your emulator name, something like this. You have to create run configuration for this to work out. So as I said, if you have the resources to be able to run Android Studio, prefer running Android Studio. It's better to run stuff from there using VS Code. You might need to be able to get down to your you know uh, command line a lot. So I think it's Okay, so to hot reload from the command line, you have to just press R. So I think it's running on my emulator right now. And if I go to main.dart and change the Flutter title to my app, save it, and press R. So hot reload, and okay, that did not work. It did not change to my app. And then maybe change the color from blue to red like we had done, and press R again. Okay, that works. So yeah, you can change things here and press R in the command line. So you have to get down to the command line a little bit more if you're using VS Code. But okay, not unusable, but a little less convenient than what we have with Android Studio out here. Okay, so what else would you guys like me to cover? Like, what next would you like me to try to build? I mean, got an idea how things are working. Um, so you see, I mean, I really don't know how Dart works right now. I'm just tinkering with code. So when you're trying to learn something new, I think it's fine, you can just start building that. You don't need to understand like the ABCD of Dart and like read two books on Dart and then work on Flutter. That's not required. When I first started building Android apps, I knew C++ as a language. I did not really know Java, but I started building Android apps, and whatever was required regarding Java, I just learned, on the way. Similarly, when I first started working on iOS, I did not have any idea about Swift or Objective C for that matter, and I just looked at the online guides, how to create a list, how to create a button, how to click on the button, how to open a web view, and I figured out. So I think later on, when you get stuck with certain things here and there, you might want to, uh, spend some time and learn how the internals of the language, like how does Swift really work inside, how does Java work inside. So I spent time understanding Java, understanding Kotlin, Swift later on, but when I'm first time building an app, you can just start off building just like this. Colors.red, you change it to colors.blue. This does not really require even any programming knowledge, just remove that, press control space, see what other autocompletes are. You can change it to Indigo. Let's see how that works. It's fine. It's I think completely okay to try and do things like that. um, Changes to Indigo, right? I think you can have multiple apps running simultaneously, so I can like keep it running on Android, and I can, I don't know, let me see, let me select iPhone and run for iOS. Okay, so I've got both the things running. I've got the Android one running. I've got the iOS one running. Okay, so that's how my CPU load looks like on a octa-core machine, i7, 8th generation, and it's using 12 GB of memory, but I'm also streaming video to you guys. So I'm running my OBS Studio, and I'm running a lot of tabs on my browsers as well. But I'm on 12 GB of used memory, almost 13 GB of used memory. CPU load pretty high, um, close to 50% CPU load. Uh, Got near to 100% almost. Memory being used by Android Studio, 2 GB itself. Apart from that, Java is using 2 GB. 1 GB with my OBS, which is my video streaming service via which you're just seeing this video. That's taking a bit of memory. I can say that. So let's just remove 1 or 2 GB of memory because I'm streaming this video to you guys. But this is resource intensive. Don't try this if you don't have a lot of RAM and a lot of processing power to hilt. I've got like my iOS and my Android app, both of them running. What I'm going to try to do is see if I can do live reload on both of them simultaneously. Does that work? So I'm going to try to select deep orange and apply. This is get applied on both. Now you have to just select your phone. You have to select Android and do the live reload on that separately. That did not work. I got a error in my IDE. Okay, okay, not that easy. iPhone 1 is running, Android 1 not running anymore. I got to stop everything, uh, stop all the processes. Okay, live reloading on iOS and Android simultaneously does not work. It will definitely work from the command line. You can run two terminals, one of them running iOS, one of them running Android, and you can do the live reload on two of them together. Right now, it's not running like that. Okay, we've got my home page, which is a stateful widget, and it has got. So there's the comment which says that this widget is the home page of your application. It's stateful, meaning that it has a state object. This class is the configuration of the state. It holds the values, something, something, something. Okay, and my homepage state extends state and it takes a generic argument my homepage. So I think this is similar to how Java works as a generic argument, I guess. So state is defined as t extends stateful widget. So I think whatever I'm seeing about Dart here is that somebody tried to create a language which is somewhere in between Java and JavaScript. So it has got classes and strict types, but it also behaves a bit like JavaScript. So yeah, I mean, if you know Java or you know JavaScript, or if you know both, then this feels really like home ground, home territory. Nothing, no problems. We got a counter, value is 0. We have a function increment counter which calls the set state function and changes the value of the counter. Okay. Uh, okay, and you got an app bar, and you've got a body, you've got child, center, column. There's a floating action button. Okay, floating action button. Okay, so this you can only add one floating action button. How to add more than one, I don't know. Fine. Um, let's say I want to add a button to increment and also a button to decrement. So I know we've got an app bar, we've got the title, the body, child, it's got children, it's got widgets, there's a text, there's another text. Can I add like, okay, let's just try this app out once again, and let's see like, so I think developing Android is of course a more resource intensive task. So when you're creating this project, I think the exact same thing is generated in Android as well as iOS. So I think for development purposes, like when you're just quickly trying to change things and see how what it affects it. If you're on a MacBook, I would say try it on the iOS simulator because your development speed will be a bit faster. You don't have to wait for things to build and just wait. I mean, it's building and it's building and it's building. Okay. Okay. So if I add like another text here, comma, and we pass a string here. Go ahead and click the button. So I add some text. So okay. Okay, so it's a column It's a column, which means everything that I add will just come one below the another, and it's a center aligned column. Let me just add a button here. Can I add a button? Let's try out. I'm gonna add a button. How can I add a button? Okay, I think I can add a flat button. What does it take? Can I pass like string to it? Okay, it needs a child. So child, can it be a text? So see, autocomplete is very helpful when you're learning a new technology. I created a flat button just like this. Okay, just create a flat button, and it says that the parameter child is required and the parameter on press is required. So I need to add these two things. I don't know Flutter, I don't know Dart. That's fine. Autocomplete is going to help me a lot when you're just trying out a new technology. Okay, so I need to pass. So let's keep the indentation out there. Just keep child. I think the child can be a text. So you know. Decrement and on pressed. So when on pressed, what should I do? I think I had to call a function. Let's just call increment counter. Increment counter. Okay. So I think I can call increment counter on pressed, and let's just see what happens. So click on this button. It does that. Okay. I think a flat button. I think I can use a material button. And a material button would look like, I think, a little better than this. Can we give it a color? Okay. Uh, color dot I don't know, how do you get the color there? Colors dot, okay, colors dot let's say I want to make it uh, red. Okay, let's run this and see if I get my material button red colored. Okay, I got my material button red colored. So I want color my text as text color as colors dot white. Oh, I think okay. So let's run that. So most of the UI, like I think here's something that I feel like a bit of problem with Flutter here is that if I want to like make changes to the UI, I have to run a lot of resources. I have to build my project. I have to keep my emulator running to be able to see every little change in my UI. I want to change my color from black to white, something like that in Android development. I can just change in my XML file, like, and I can see the preview that's happening right there. Here it's kind of resource intensive. So if you're like uh, on the road and you're like running on battery power, just changing the UI is going to drain the battery of your development machine very, very fast. So I think this is not good, not good. I think the Flutter team needs to be able to do something regarding this. They should fix something regarding this. Okay, so let me just okay. So decrement, if I want to like reduce the number, so maybe I can create another function like increment counter. I don't know. So let's say create new function void decrement counter, and it does set state. So set state and does counter minus minus. So I'm just looking at the existing code and I'm just writing some new code which just does the opposite of that. So I think this is a good strategy when you're learning a new a technology. A lot of times, like I am teaching like something like Node.js and Android down here at Coding Blocks, and a lot of times people who are in the sessions, they just come up and they ask me, like, uh, if you pick up a new technology, if you are like doing, say, Angular today, tomorrow you start learning about React. So how do you figure things out? How do you use a book? Do you watch videos? Do you like enroll an online course or something like that? So I think this is how I do most of the times. I just go to the getting started page, follow the instructions, and I get started. Sometimes installing something, I might get stuck, so you just check up on Stack Overflow, just copy that error, paste it there, find out why that happened. I think so far so good. I mean, we have been doing Flutter right now here, and following the getting started instructions, there hasn't been any big problem right now till here. We were able to build this app fine, and I've been able to like create something like this. So now if I click on decrement, it's gonna I don't know. Did that work? I'll just switch to using the iPhone. I think it's going to be a little faster. I just feel. Let's just see. Because usually, like doing native development for iOS on my MacBook is a little faster than doing native development for Android. Um, I'll just switching to the iPhone simulator instead. Okay, so if I press on plus button, it increases, and if I press on decrement, it should reduce the number. Oh, I think I need to change the name of the function call here on pressed uh, decrement counter, and decrement should reduce the number. Okay, so I think I've got a hang of how it's working. So it's pretty easy, and I think the situation I'm in right now, I'm able to add buttons, do increment, decrement kind of stuff. I think it took me more time with native Android development and with native iOS development to get to this state in those platforms. So I think it's easier to get started with, definitely. So before we go ahead with other things, let's discuss like what's mainly the kind of differences between something like Flutter and comparing it to something like, say, React Native or Native Script. And that's where I think this article is really very helpful. So yeah, this article, it's called "What's Revolutionary About Flutter," and it's written by W.M. Leeler, who is actually one of the people who are developer advocates of Flutter. So it's written by somebody in the Flutter team, right? And so let's just discuss about this architecture on how native development really works. So just a second. Yeah. So what happens is like you have got your native code, which is you writing your Java code or your Swift code and all of that stuff. And there is a lot of things that the SDK provides you. Like when you're doing Android development, there is like a class called button, and you create an object of the class button. You get a button on the screen. Similarly, like you're on iOS, you have got UI button, or you've got UI text view, you've got UI label, these kind of classes. So the platform, as in the SDK or the OS itself, provides you with widgets, which like things that you're using to build views. Now, if you look at something like um, a bunch of ways in web development where people are using, actually what they're doing is they are creating a web app which is completely made using HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, and then they're running it inside a web view. So it's somewhat how Electron works for desktop. It's basically you're running a copy of the browser, and your mobile app is not really a mobile app. It's basically a web app which it looks like a mobile app because somebody has installed it, but it's just a copy of your web browser. So now these apps definitely suffer a lot in performance because whatever code is getting executed, it's getting executed inside a browser. Then the browser's code is getting executed inside the OS. So there is two layers of translation, and like
the UI is completely done using CSS, so you can make a UI feel and look like whatever you want to. Okay, so that's like the advantage in these kind of platforms. Now, then there's like what React Native does is that your logic, your business side is written in JavaScript, okay, and your views, you use the OEM widgets, you use the the Android's own button, you use iOS's own button. So your UI layer is really good in performance because you're not creating a web view and you're not rendering HTML inside that. You're doing what native apps do. You're using an actual UI, but your your business logic has been written in JavaScript and it has to run inside a JavaScript virtual machine, which means it's running inside something like V8 for Android, or it's running in JavaScript core in iOS. So then you need to have a translation engine, a real-time translation engine. So it's like remote procedure calls, RPCs. Your JavaScript code, now what happens is, so I'll just go to a I don't know if my iPad is going to be visible here or not. Yeah. So I'm talking about Flutter in this video. So I'm just reading a Flutter. Okay. What I want to talk about is if you have like some of your code written in your JavaScript part. So there's your JS code written on one side, and then your UI of your app. All of that part is running using your Java or your Swift code. Okay. So every time like you have say this kind of a button, let's say your square shape kind of thing here, and you click on this button and you want this button to move up in this like slow animation. You want it to move up. Okay, so what you have to do is you have to say calculate the position. So you have to run something like a loop. Okay, so you run a loop, and inside that loop you calculate position like position y minus minus, and then you render this button again, something like that. You do that. Okay, now think of this, that this JavaScript part, all of that is running in a separate thread, and your UI is running in a separate thread, and they are just interacting with each other. And now you want the button to move. So the function that decides how the button is going to move is in a separate thread, and the UI on inside which the button is actually going to move is in a separate thread. So you want 60 FPS. So at 60 times per second, you need information to go across this bridge. Okay, so that's what we're discussing about this bridge kind of thing. Okay, so in fact, this article actually describes it really well. Is that but because JavaScript realm access native OEM widgets in the native realm, it has to go through the bridge. Okay, and there's this quote which is actually from the actual React Native website, and the people who have developed React Native admit to this, is that the performance bottleneck often occurs when we move from one realm to another. In order to architect performant React Native apps, we must keep passes over the bridge to a minimum. So React Native says that you have got like your business logic in JS and your UI in Java, and React says that if you want your app to perform well, these two need to interact as less as possible. Of course, I mean, you can design that, but that's a very bad constraint to have. So that's why I think when you're making React Native apps, you end up writing a lot of these bridges. And there's been an article by Airbnb. So Sunsetting React Native by Airbnb. They have written an article. It's a long series of articles, and they have written how Airbnb created all of their apps using React Native, and they ran that for a few years, and then they finally decided that React Native is not really scaling to their needs, and that's why they're moving to native development using Kotlin for Android, using Swift for iOS. They're going to that. So this is where I think the Flutter approach comes in, and Flutter does is that Flutter goes one level below React, and Flutter works very similar to the kind of architecture that game engines use. So if you know how Unity as a game engine works, or like any of these game engines, Unreal Engine, they work is that they take the widget rendering part of the job and they bring it into the realm of Flutter. So we are not using OEM widgets anymore. So when I'm creating a button in Flutter, that button is inside my app. That's not the operating system's button. So that makes my app a little bigger in size. My app's responsibility increases, but I have direct access to the graphics layer, and the app is rendering every pixel on its own. So now you don't need to have a bridge. You don't have this problem where JavaScript and Java code is interacting with each other. So in the Flutter case, your Dart code and your Kotlin code or your Java code or your Swift code in your iOS, they do not need to interact with each other at 60 frames per second, because the Flutter code, the Dart code, is itself generating its own UI. So once the Flutter application is loaded, it has started off. Once it has started, then after that, the Flutter app can handle its own performance. But of course, now if you go to the Flutter website and you look in all the things that you can do, you will find that there is very little mention about services, because services are still native. You want to use location, you want to use audio, you want to use Bluetooth, you want to use camera, all of these things are still native. So these will again need that cross-platform thing, and we need to wait for the Flutter ecosystem to grow really mature and a lot of libraries to be available for these. Otherwise, we will have to write a lot of bridges ourselves. Okay. In fact, there's this diagram I think down there which shows, yeah. So your app is actually doing the rendering part, uh, which like this is uh, the React Native architecture, where there is a bridge, and the bridge updates the native widgets. So every time you want to change the position or the color or any animation you want to do on the UI, you do it over the bridge. Inside React Native, you don't need to do it over the bridge. So I think there's a difference between Flutter and performance intensive frameworks like React Native. Okay, so anything else, guys, want to ask about Flutter, or about, I mean, anything else? Anything else you want me to try? Like you want me to show something, like uh, create a navigation drawer or something like that? I can do that. You have any ideas? Let me know. Any questions till now? Anybody has any questions till now about what you've seen till now? Let's try out something. I think see how to. Also, like if you are a native Android developer, I think there's a very nice article written by my colleague and my friend Harshit. Has written this article called "For the Flutter: Understanding Flutter as an Android Developer." So this gives you a good perspective of how to understand Flutter if you know Android development already. And in fact, there is a page in the Flutter docs about Flutter for Android devs. So if you're an Android developer, what are the things that are comparable to Flutter? So what is the equivalent of a view in Flutter? So what is a view in Android is and a widget in Flutter. So views and widgets are very similar to each other. In Android, you can mutate the views, as you can change the text or the color or something of a view. You can't do that with widgets in Flutter. In Flutter, what you do is you have stateless and stateful widgets, and if you're a stateful widget, you change the state of that widget, and in that case, that widget re-renders itself. If you are like an iOS developer or if you are a React Native developer, then you can check out those sections as well to get an idea about how to get started with Flutter. Let me just get the cookbook and try out some of the things. Okay, add a drawer to the screen. How to add a drawer to the screen? So we need to create a scaffold and we have to add a drawer, and we populate the items inside the drawer, and we have to put this scaffold inside my project. Let's see. So let's see how we can add this app drawer kind of thing. So what you can do is, I think I have got this main.dart. So let me just try out this new Dart file called drawer.dart, and I'll import material dart. Stop everything, and I think we'll do void main. Void main is a function that runs run app. Okay. So inside run app, I think I can put a new scaffold. So okay, I think new is optional. Using new is optional. You can omit the new keyword in Dart. I just figured out when I'm looking at this code. So this new keyword is not used anywhere. Although like you usually do that in Java or JavaScript, here you can just directly call the constructor like you do it in Kotlin. So you have your scaffold, and I think your scaffold needs I don't know what does the scaffold need. Can have a drawer. I think the drawer can be of this type. Okay, so we'll have a drawer. So drawer needs a child. This child could be the child could be a list view, and this list view can contain certain things inside that. Or I think the child can be a column. This column can contain some children, which is going to be of widget type. And let's say we have like some texts, item 1 and item 2, something like that. This scaffold, I think it would need, apart from the drawer, it would need I think an app bar. I think what does an app bar need? So app bar needs a title, something like my app. Okay, so the title needs to be a widget. So let's say it's a text with my app inside that. As you can see, I'm like looking very little at the documentation, and I'm just winging it and just going through what with the autocomplete, what does it say. So I've created a scaffold which has an app bar, which is a drawer, and I don't know, can the app bar have anything else? Icon. What else can it have? I think it has elevation and okay. So We can go with that. The scaffold has an app bar which has a title and a drawer. So let's just try running this. So I can try running drawer.dart. I think with control shift R this. Yeah, I can directly run drawer.dart. I can have like a main.dart is one of the entry points and drawer.dart is another entry point. So I can have like two .dart files. And I'm gonna try to run drawer.dart on my project right now. Okay. Since we have got an error here. Hmm. So, if I use a material app instead, okay, so that works. So I have to create a material app, and I think you have to create either a material app or Cupertino app, and I've got a material app, and inside the material app, I've created a home, which is a scaffold. Because scaffold, I think what I checked about a scaffold was that if I see material components, then there's a scaffold. A scaffold is basically the basic material design, which has an app bar, a body, and a bottom navigation bar if needed, and a floating action button and all that stuff. Uh, so so yeah, we have got the nav drawer, which has got this item 2 and item 3 like that up there, and like this. So I think it's pretty good. Um, and the nav drawer, whether it's gonna come below or above the items, I think that can be designed as well, as I guess. So how can we get like a header for the a column can have a row? Is there a row? Oh, so I can put a row. I don't know if there's a height or width, something like that. Okay. What all widgets do we have? You can create a container with height and width, and you can create a row, and you can create a column. Okay. So, or you can create like a placeholder as well. So, okay, placeholder has So say height. Okay, let's see how this looks like. Put a placeholder with a height and a width. Then I put the text items after that. That did not work. Okay. So you can put a placeholder or something like that, like this, or like if I want to place a container. Most of these things are pretty well documented. Like there is column has documentation how to add a row and all of that stuff. So that's pretty good. I think one of the things that we need to figure out here is compared to a lot of other things like in Android is like how do we change the page. So routing is very important. So let's see if there's some things in my cookbook given for routing. Do we have, like, let's say, let's go to the cookbook, and yeah, so routes are very important, like routing. So I want to go to like two different activities, when I click on two different buttons, those kind of things. Like how do we navigate, how do we page in our app to another page? And there is like the concept of uh, navigation out here. So you have to create two pages. So they have created a first screen and a second screen, and then we create routes, and the routes define which page we want to go to. So hey, it sounds good. um, okay, so let's try out this root thing. Let's say I want to create an app with roots. So what we'll do is stop all of that stuff. New dot file with roots dot dot. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to create a first screen and a second screen. So let's import material. Okay, and we need this second screen. What do these two screens do is like the screen has a app bar and a body, and there's a button, and there's a button on clicking on which we will go to the second screen, and here on clicking on the button we'll go to the first screen. So we'll define the routes, we'll create a material app. So we'll do this thing, void main run app. It will run a new material app. Inside the material app we'll have this initial root, which is the slash path, and then we will define routes, the initial root and the second screen. Okay, then we'll open the first screen and the second screen in these two cases. So when we click on the button inside the first screen, we want to go to the second screen. So first screen, we have this button, navigate to the second screen. There we go. And do the same thing when we go to the second screen, back to the first screen. So we'll just use navigator.pop. So navigator.pop, I think, would go one step back. Like it's going to, the navigation is like a stack. So we'll change this to navigator.pop. We'll go back. So we have got first screen, we have got the second screen, and okay. So I think this should work well, I guess. So I should give a title to my app, roots demo. Yeah, let's try it out. So I'm trying out the roots project. There's a material app which is a title which has an initial root, and there are two roots. And then we have the first screen and the second screen into which we can go when we go to these roots. So sounds good. Sounds good. Let's see how that works out. Okay, so this is my first screen. Click on the button launch screen, it goes to the second screen, and I can click on go back, or I can click here. If I click here, then also I can go back, launch screen, and I go back. So iOS like animations out here. How does that work if I do it on an Android app? Let's just try this out on my Android app. Should do the exact same thing on Android, and the animations might be a bit different, but basically it should do the same thing. Now you can create an app drawer and add the buttons for going to different routes using the nav drawer, or you can create a bottom navigation bar. I mean, there are a lot of different ways you can do this navigation. But basically, having the power to navigate is important in apps because we need to change pages in our app. We need to let the user go from one page to another. Now, keep in mind this the approach which uh, the Flutter uses is very web kind of approach, because Flutter has originally been made for web developers to be able to build mobile apps. So the roots are in the form of URL. Okay. Now, as a mobile developer, it's very confusing to think that why should my initial root be called slash and my second root be called slash second. Why should they be called roots in the first place? Because we have got activities, we can have intents, we can go from one activity to another activity. But you need to get out of that mindset when you are thinking of like Flutter, or like in iOS development, you have this app delegates, and you can delegate from one app delegate to another app delegate. You need to like not think about that approach anymore, because here we are thinking a lot like how web apps work. Your route changes and you go from one screen to another screen. So mostly that's how this is going to work. Like I don't know, is it running? Is it running on my Android build? So developing for iOS is pretty smooth, especially because I'm on a MacBook. Android still, like, I don't know, it's not exactly make reducing the time a lot. Is the time involved is still there. Launch screen, I go to the second screen, back. Okay, so see, the animation is a bit different, not the iOS kind of animation. So the different animations and all these are supported in different operating systems by Flutter. So I think we got a good idea about Flutter here. I would not be continuing further in this video because this was pretty much like figuring things out. So at Coding Blocks, what we're thinking of doing is we will create a course on Flutter. It will be most likely an online course, not an offline course. So we'll have like, building everything that we do in our Android online course. So building basic apps, building an app like Flipkart where you can order things, creating chat kind of apps, connecting to Firebase, and getting database, and all that stuff. Saving data in a database offline. So we'll see how to use SQLite to save data offline, and we'll do all of that stuff. So I will just go through all of these things a little bit in the next few days and try to build some nice little apps using Flutter, and I will show those apps to you guys, and then we will come up with an online course where we can like do Flutter in a very methodical way. I think the Flutter documentation website does not do a good job as of now, because you have got this cookbook. This cookbook is like, if you have something specific in mind, then this cookbook is useful. But like there isn't any structure, like like in Android you have like first you learn how to build activities, and you learn how to like create layouts, and then you learn how to create services, and then you learn like database and file management, and then connecting to Firebase and stuff. So like there is a idea in your mind, there's a structure in your mind. Flutter, it's like pretty much all over the place. They have like, it's more like you want to do something, how to do that, you can get it on the Flutter website. But I don't know what I want to do. I just want to learn Flutter from ABCD kind of thing. That's not there on the Flutter website a lot. Like the development guide has got like, okay, user interface, here is how you do that. Data and backend, here's how you do that. So you just see how to like create a journey, like start from the basics and then create more complicated projects using Flutter. So I'll let you guys know when we have some courses around that ready. Thank you for the people who attended. So I'll be signing off. Anybody has anything to say, please let me know. If you like the video, you can like subscribe to our channel. If you are not subscribed, you can subscribe to our channel. We keep having such live streams very often where we discuss new technologies. Okay. So once again, thank you guys for attending. Good night. Have a nice day, all of you. And do definitely try out Flutter, build some apps using that. Let me know how that goes, how the experience with Flutter goes. Okay.